Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I know we're the last session on a long day with some awesome content. My name is Yvonne Chung. I manage the solutions architects for Red Hat for our public sector group, and I'm joined here by Rod.
That's me. I'm Rod Moore. I'm a product solution architect here at Red Hat, and my focus area is our management portfolio.
So Rod and I were really excited because when we got on with Cindy this week and she told us it would be us doing a fireside chat, I said, okay, we're gonna have some fun with this. We're gonna keep it casual. Because Rod is, if you have not had the pleasure of meeting Rod yet, he is one of the most engaging people to talk to. So it'll be a fun session, and I invite you all to join the conversation. Again, we just want to keep it casual and just reflect on all the awesome things that we heard today. Were there any sessions that caught your attention? There was so much, so it's hard to. I know you took pages of notes.
Everyone today is going to learn a little something about me. In a previous lifetime, I worked in cancer research. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
I certainly did at NIH, at NCI.
Oh, okay.
Yep, I was pipetting DNA samples and doing all that intellectually fulfilling work.
Wow, very cool.
One of the habits I picked up there, documentation. All right, so
something we software engineers don't do very well.
Exactly. But it transferred into this career because when I heard that I was going to have an opportunity to attend and listen to the various sessions, I became very selfish, because I realized, wow, I'm getting an opportunity to hear a variety of real-world use cases that I can use as a part of my presentations. So I brought my trusty notebook, and I don't want to tell you how many pages I have already. Let's say I'm in double figures.
Wow. Well, I mean, there was so much to take away today. So, I wasn't part of the committee that organized this, but it's pretty clear that there are some themes. Edge was obviously a really big one. We're in the Edge track right now, but also AI/ML, security, automation, and quantum computing, which is really cool. I mean, it feels like we're in a science fiction book, that we're even actually talking about that, and that's a possibility that's not so far out of our grasp. So, super interesting.
You know, when I looked at the things that really resonated with me, you can almost split them into two categories. You know, there's the things that I see as a direct relationship to what I do day in and day out for Red Hat. So when I heard the FEMA presentator talking about the benefits they gained by, changing their environment, containerizing their application, and how easy it made them, allowed them to move to the cloud. And then the geek in me had to admit, the quantum computing was really impressive. Just that whole fact about how it's making complex math so much easier and faster, which is opening up the possibility of doing so many advanced things. So those themes were really critical today, and like I said, selfishly, I got a lot of beneficial information that I plan to use. Now, in my role, I'm in the management space, all right?
What does that mean, the management space? We're not talking about like people management, right? We're talking about managing systems.
No. That's the last thing I want to do is people manager. Yeah, what I'm talking about is so often our customers focus on, well, I want to implement this development platform. I want to get it stood up, and that's so much of what they focus on. But once you have it stood up, you've got a number of challenges that you have to address. One of the things I frequently tell people is that, sometimes I think the only single cluster environment is in my home lab. But then I realized that's not true, because to do my job, I have multiple clusters in AWS and Azure And I'm leveraging them to show people the tools that we have to assist with that multi-cluster management scenario. You know, I don't know if you knew this. Again, you're going to learn something new about me. I've been working with management products for over 20 years now.
I did know that. I did know that.
Over 20 years. It's amazing
Yeah.
how fast that time
Doesn't it
can
ever
fly
get
by.
stale? Doesn't it? No, because management is always the key to unlocking greater technology adoption. And certainly a problem with edge, right? I mean,
Yeah, the environments are always changing. If you talk to me when I first became a part of Red Hat, I was focused on managing virtualized environments, all right? And now it's shifted to managing Kubernetes clusters. And as you get more and more of these clusters, and you look at all the various components that comprise them, and now we're talking edge, and the number of managed endpoint is increasing dramatically. So when I see edge, when people ask me about edge challenges, we're talking about a problem of scale, all right?
Absolutely.
And so it brings two key concepts into play, all right? First, people have to throw out the old way of doing things. The idea that you're going to manually adjust a particular cluster, that's great when you have 3 clusters. When you may potentially have 3,000 endpoints, it's just not practical. The two terms that we like to leverage at Red Hat is the concept of fleet management and also joining that with automation. To assist with fleet management, you really want to take sort of a policy-based approach, right? There's certain terminology you hear repeated so often, and the one I like to leverage is infrastructure as code, right? Save yourself some time. Introduce a level of consistency that's just not possible with manual process by defining these configurations in code, all right? And then, of course, automation. We have the great fortune of having a tremendous automation platform in-house in Ansible, and leveraging Ansible to automate as much as possible to make it really feasible to manage these large-scale environments.
Yep. And this is a challenge with edge adoption, not just because of the scale, but because when we deploy, for example, in theater, in a remote location, you don't always have a Kubernetes expert on hand to take a look at your edge device and what may be going wrong with it. So having that automation to maybe even just like hit the reset button and for it all to come back up is going to be really critical.
Yeah, and that's something people don't really consider sometimes. When you start talking about Kubernetes clusters, initially you're talking about redundancy and failover and all of these things. But as we dip more into these edge scenarios, there's not always redundancy. It's a single small footprint device. So the management problem becomes not just one of initial provisioning, but potential multiple re-provisionings of that device. Without automation, it's just not feasible.
Yep. I also thought the security and edge conversation was really interesting, and we touched a little bit on that in the previous session, but that's a space for me where there's still a lot of questions. So I think that is definitely going to be a challenge to adoption. One of the sessions, I can't remember which, the speaker had mentioned like this vision of plug and play. Like maybe someday we can get to the point where edge is really plug and play. And I think security is something that we need to be intentional about if we're going to get to that point. For decades, we've been leveraging, 800-53 to accredit our enterprise systems, but that's very much a data center-centric approach, and we were able to adapt that with the advent of cloud, which introduced new concepts. So now we have this this concept of separation of concerns, where we have assurance as consumers of the cloud that anything below this line of demarcation has been accredited and is safe for us to consume. So will there be something like FedRAMP but for edge, where we can buy like commodity edge devices and we have the assurance that they are configured in a way that's compliant with government standards. I think that's a really interesting conversation. And certainly there were multiple vendors and thought leaders sort of touching on that today. Intel talked about how they're securing their software supply chain, but still something where we need to evolve more guidance. There isn't really concrete guidance out there. There's some use case specific ones like IoT, but we need like real guidance about how do we get to the plug and play vision with edge. Because it's all about the data, right, Rod? And a lot of the use cases that we talked about is really moving the processing closer to the edge to deal with like latency issues and to be able to make more real-time decisions, especially in theater. And as we're moving that data and that intelligence to the edge, it becomes all that more important to secure that.
Yeah. As I was reviewing my notes right before the session, one thing really stuck out to me, and that was how the concept of time was critical to so many of the sessions today. Starting in the morning when the Deputy CIO for the Air Force was talking about the warfare scenarios, and he mentioned, this agile combat development and how Edge allows them to expand the mission and be far more flexible. And
he had a lot of good sound bites, I have to say. There was a lot to take away from that session.
Exactly. He was very quotable. In the quantum computing session, we talked about how it allows us to do complex math faster, which opens up use cases that weren't practical before. In the clouds section, there was this really great comment about, they were talking about in their use case and how they, at FEMA, broke the app down into smaller components that weren't as reliant, taking that microservices approach, and how that saved them a ton of time when upgrading the environment. And the last one I'll mention, and I know I've got a ton more, but the last one I'll mention is in the data science section, where in the healthcare space, they were talking about using data models to figure out how they could remove administrative overhead in their interactions with patients at the VA. Always leveraging this data collection and things to improve their usage of time.
Yeah, there are a lot of different use cases. When we think about edge in government, your mind immediately goes to DoD use cases, of course, but it was great to hear about how they're leveraging these technologies to help save lives and fight forest fires and just lots of cool stuff. Exactly.
And then, of course, over and over today, we kept hearing about JADC2.
Yeah.
Right. And one thing you'll notice in all the conversations about it, that it's going to be a process to reach that desired state, that endpoint that JADC2 mentions, where you can have multiple systems all sharing a common data source. Before we get to that beautiful place, the fact of the matter is, initially, Edge is in some ways introducing more silos.
You're absolutely right.
Right?
Yeah.
This is very much a work in progress. We still are working on how to develop these more complex pipelines, for example. During the drone conversation earlier, there was a great line about how the pipelines have become so much more complex that they got to cover everything from the developer's desktop to this edge device. And we're still working on that. We certainly are providing capabilities and functionalities to help with that, but we still have some work to do before getting to that total shared data space.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I thought that Lockheed example was really interesting as well. It's just interesting to see how intelligent the edge is becoming. So, the challenge with edge is we don't we don't control any of the constraints, right? We don't know what context it's going to be deployed in always, and I think, the Air Force CTO made that quote about gracefully degrading, right? It has to be adaptive, and to design a system that's able to withstand all these different factors that could be thrown at it, whether it be, limited power or size or network, which are things to think about, but even like, being shot at or, being dropped, in water or whatever it may be. We don't control the parameters in which we deploy it always. And so to design systems that can be adaptive like that is certainly a new challenge for us. And even just the idea that, the Stalker drone, we can swap those models in flight to adapt to what it's seeing on the ground is pretty incredible. So lots of great innovation already happening.
Oh, exactly. And I know you mentioned it earlier, but I have to bring it up again. In a lot of the sessions, we kept hearing about how one of the things we need to work on is adapting what we're learning as we're creating these models to other use cases. And it really resonated with me when he talked about comparing the drone scenario to firefighting, about the expansion of theater from a warfare standpoint, from as a fire expands through an area. The gathering the different resources and making sure they're appropriately allocated. Incredibly interesting, and definitely something that my customers are going to be hearing a lot about in my presentations going forward.
Yeah, I think Edges is going to be interesting because it's very much an ecosystem play, right? We need to bring hardware vendors together, software vendors together, integrators together with government to really tackle some of these use cases. So we're only going to solve this problem with government industry collaboration. I'm just curious, how many folks here are in government, if you want to raise your hand? Got a couple. And then how many people are from industry? I think that's most of the folks in the room are probably from. Is anyone doing Edge today? I'd love to. Would you be up for talking about it?
At a high level, at Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection, pushing Edge out to their respective green-suited border agents between the crossing and points of entry. They have no common operating picture at this time. It's a series of workstations and operational centers. So they're trying to push edge compute out. They've got several proof of concept activities going right now.
Yeah, and that again speaks to some of the things we were talking about earlier. When you're deploying to the edge at like potentially a border station, you're not going to have an IT expert always on hand to manage that system. So it has to be automated.
Yeah, it has to be foolproof.
Absolutely, yeah. Really interesting. Anyone else working on an edge use case that'd be willing to share? I mean, there's tons all across government. Again, everyone goes immediately to think about Department of Defense, and everyone else is behind. They've been doing edge, for decades at this point. Oh yeah, go ahead.
It's been table for the time being, but with weather radio, the content for broadcast is generated at the Weather Forecast Office, and there's about 100 some around the country. What we would like is to be able to generate the content at the site, at the antenna, because one thing that we don't have with weather radio right now is failover. If a WFO goes down, all of its antennas go down as well, and just about every other function we have can be failed over to a neighboring WFO or several. There's secondary and tertiary backups, but weather radio is kind of tied to that one site. So if we had a good edge solution, that would enable us to have a better failover strategy.
So you must be with NOAA, maybe with AWIPS.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Awesome, yeah. There's tons of good use cases.
I've got a good
weather.
use case.
Yeah.
All right.
Tell me.
You talked about how Red Hat is, we're not doing it alone, that we're collaborating with government agencies and other partners. Of course, from just the previous session, you learned about how we're collaborating with our hardware partners. In the previous session, there was mention of the cube frame from HPE, but it's important to know that we're also collaborating with Intel and Dell and various other hardware partners. One of the real-world use cases that we've been very successful with recently is this whole concept of zero-touch provisioning. And really what it is, it's really taking a GitOps approach to provisioning Kubernetes clusters, in that we allow you to define what we call a site plan. And in that site plan, you're defining the configuration of your entire edge environment. And you're storing that in a Git repo. And then, typical of Red Hat, we're leveraging a number of open source projects to facilitate the provisioning of these items. Some may be cloud-based, but some may be physical devices on, doing bare metal provisioning. Creating those clusters, and then as a part of that provisioning process, we're incorporating the agent to our advanced cluster management solution, which then allows us to layer on policies that configure the cluster, and potentially using that even to deploy workloads to those edge devices. Now, that initially was targeted at our telco customers, but we've got various other spaces that are seeing the value of that approach and doing the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, we're actually working directly with the hardware vendors, HPE, Dell, Intel, so on and so forth, to develop that within the factories themselves. So as things come out of the factories, they're having technology flashed onto them. So whether it be Red Hat Enterprise Linux or OpenShift, will be imaged at the factories, at those hardware vendors, on some of their edge-oriented devices. So a lot of exciting innovation that we're doing in collaboration with our partners. And I think, for me, that was the biggest takeaway of the day, that our partners, whether they be government or industry, are absolutely critical for tackling edge. For so many reasons, but because again, we're thinking about building an entire system, and Red Hat is just one part of that bigger picture. And so I was so excited to hear all of the awesome partners we had today. Obviously, we talked about Lockheed, but also Leidos, CACI, WWT, so many great partners here talking about how they're innovating in this space. And I thought it was great to hear from them.
Yes.
All right. Well, any other
Oh,
thoughts?
we have a question.
Oh, good. I couldn't see because of the lights.
Actually, since you mentioned about zero-touch provisioning, so my question is from cybersecurity viewpoint. After deploying the edge computing system, I think there is a concern about maintenance, especially security. So what architectural feature do you think is more or most important from that viewpoint, the security viewpoint?
Well, I think a lot of the conversation around edge and security has roots in sort of the zero trust conversation as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Because obviously we're applying zero trust principles in our data center, where we actually may own the other pieces of hardware, but at the edge, like, we can't trust anything, right?
Sure.
And so a lot of the principles are being drawn from the conversation around zero trust. But going back to our conversation earlier, I do think this is a space that needs more conversation with government and industry, so that we have something like an 853, a set of controls, a common understanding of what secure at the edge means, so that we can have vendors that could provide pre-made solutions that meet those standards, because otherwise we're not going to get to that plug-and-play vision. And so I think that's something that I think remains to be developed.
Yeah, and I think it's important that, as a part of our collaboration with these partners, we're leveraging technologies like Redfin to interact with the BMC controllers on hardware. So as a part of that site plan, we're actually authenticating against that hardware to ensure that it's an appropriate target for deployment. So while that's one small step, as I said, we're early in this, and
Yep.
there's more that we can be doing.
Yeah, absolutely, because we don't control what happens in theater, and edge devices can easily be compromised, and so it's really important that we think of this especially as data is moving closer to the edge, and the models that we're using to make inferences on that data is happening closer to the edge. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns?
Yeah. Thanks for the answer. But as I said, I think the fact that edge devices can be compromised, then what? I think that still remains a big concern.
It is absolutely a big concern, and we have to think of security as at all layers, because an edge device is an entire system. So from hardware level security, and I know there's innovations happening there, like Lockheed Martin is working on some secure virtualization technology that integrates with the Intel chipset, just as an example. So there's lots of thought going into how do we secure every layer of the edge system because of that threat of being compromised. That was a great question, thank you.
Any other questions we could potentially address?
Or just thoughts anybody wants to share. I see a lot of thought leaders in the room that I know are just have a ton to contribute to this conversation. So. All right.
Well, with that, I guess we'll finish about 4 minutes early.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time. I will be. You're hanging around for a bit.
We're hanging
Sure.
out.
We're
Rod
hanging
and I are
around.
having fun, so we're hanging out. Come, feel free to join us and
Feel
chat
free
and
to
love
talk to us further about this. There's definitely some key tools that we offer as Red Hat to assist with this process, and we could perhaps discuss those in greater detail.
All right. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.